ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another fabulous episode of the Healthcare Trailblazers podcast. I'm very excited to be sitting here today with Yoni Stein, CEO and co-founder at Laguna Health. Laguna is a really interesting healthcare company that is definitely making its waves. I think I heard about you first does it make sense that were you talked about in Zev Newworth's recent book?
Yes.
Yes. So Beyond the Walls, listen to that cover to cover. Great book. And I think that was my first interaction with Laguna Health. Oh, look at that. He's got the page open. Beautiful. Beyond the Walls. So Laguna Health is definitely making its waves through healthcare innovation. And if you're being quoted in Zev's book, then you really made the top of the cut. So super excited to be sitting with you today, Yoni. Thanks so much for spending time.
Thank you for having me, Mendel.
So let's take a quick trip down memory lane. Today you're in Tel Aviv, Israel, running this incredible healthcare company. Where did you grow up and how did you get started in healthcare?
Grew up in a bunch of places, I guess. As a kid, grew up in Kishinev, Moldova, Soviet Union. So kind of the first decade of my life was spent there. Moved like many folks, I guess, at that wave, if you will, to Israel in 1990. Spent the next 20 years growing up here, training as an engineer, and then moving more to the business side of the world. So kind of moved with my family to the States for B school and actually spent a decade more on the business side at a very exciting startup out of San Francisco that went public, and then got deep in finance and investing at a large private equity credit fund called Fortress Investment Group. All of that was an amazing school for me to move into healthcare, which sadly is typical for many digital health entrepreneurs. I'm from a personal event. We lost my mother-in-law post-hospital discharge. That changed up a bunch of things for my wife and myself and got me to leave finance and move actually back here, which was putting kind of the circumstances aside, fortunate because that, as I joke about it, reunited Pinky and the Brain. The Brain is my co-founder, Yael, was truly the brain and the duo, and got us working on Laguna in 2020.
Wow. Quite the journey. So let's take a couple steps back to that first startup. What was it, and what was your role there? When did you get started? Because going from startup to going public sounds like quite the journey. I just finished full disclaimer. I just finished the book Founders. I don't know if you've read it, but the story of PayPal, and so I just went on a mental wild ride just listening to that kind of story. So tell us a little bit about that first startup.
It was such a fascinating school for entrepreneurship and what's known these days as business model innovation. And I was so lucky and fortunate to get into that company because it was an absolute rocket ship, namely kind of took off from nothing to an IPO in just shy of 3 years. I had to be very candid about it, very minimal, if any, contribution to that, but it was an amazing opportunity, humbly, to be part of that and learn and not get in the way, if you will. So kind of during business school, I was, networking with a bunch of VCs. One of them introduced me to the founder and president of that startup. I ended up doing a summer internship there, which was pretty cool. I mean, it was a startup in patent risk management at a time of my life where I didn't know much about patents and probably even less so about risk management. But it was plain to see that it was a company with this unstoppable momentum. And so I was very fortunate to get in for this summer internship, commute actually after, and then move my family to San Francisco. And I'm saying that this was an amazing school for business model innovation because at that point I was kind of a engineering geek, if you will, or a geeky engineer who at that point thought, entrepreneurship means better software, better hardware. And they had neither. They just, quote unquote, had a much smarter way of doing something. When structured well, took off like a rocket ship. And seeing how you execute on that business model innovation and structure that proposition and build this kind of viral loop was amazing. And they executed it to perfection, going public in May 2011 with north of 100 million in ARR and tens of millions in profit.
That's incredible. What a journey. And so moving your family out there, again, some of this is biased by, like I said, my recent reading of the book Founders, but and maybe similar to you, actually, that guy Max Levchin, very similar kind of origin story. Was starting out in the Soviet Union, coming over and being an engineer, and but what was the culture like in that area in San Francisco, in Silicon Valley? That whole it's very romanticized in the startup tech world. What was it like to actually live in it?
First of all, I'm blushing and humbled by the comparison to a Max Levchin, who's a legend. Obviously, I'm not quite there. It was romantic for me, right? And kind of beauty's in the eye of the beholder. It was amazing being in this kind of Florence of the Renaissance, whatever, and it truly felt that way. Certainly, kind of for a techie oriented person like myself at a time where not only kind of the Bay Area was blossoming, but San Francisco in particular. And we're fortunate to move in 2010 to San Francisco proper and stay there through late 2019. It was exciting that kind of everyone around you essentially in that wave of creation that is at the same time very kind of concentrating on building stuff, if you will, and at the same time very diverse by in terms of the population comprising that building and the manifestation of the building. It became, remember, kind of the Uber for X wave. X could have been anything. The joke goes that in hindsight, Uber for X equation only works when X equals taxi, but or transportation for that matter. But be it as it may, kind of at that point, the creation was so diverse, both as far as the input, the people going into that, and output, or kind of the vectors of impact. And that was amazing. That was very fulfilling and exciting professionally, and frankly, fun socially. So we felt very lucky to be there at that time.
That's awesome. And so, final question about that kind of period in your life. Even if you weren't, like you said, very meaningfully involved in the company, you were part of a company that went from zero to like you said, unicorn, public company, and not just in the. I know some public companies that are worth absolutely nothing. I know some CEOs of publicly traded companies that are literally, you talk to them and you're like, did you miss second grade of business school? Like, how are these guys like? So being a publicly traded company doesn't necessarily mean anything, but being a successfully publicly traded company is definitely meaningful. And so being part of that culture, I would feel like curious if it changed your perspective about what was possible for you and what was possible in business, and if that translates over to your, I mean, I know skipping ahead a little bit, but if that translates over to the broadening of your mindset in your launch of Laguna.
I think I knew that I wanted to launch Laguna a while back. And when I say Laguna, I use that not specifically, if you will, into what thankfully Laguna is growing up to be now, but more so as far as doing that with an admired friend, partner in a meaningful and mission oriented space. And so I'm saying that I had a sense 15 years ago that I want to do that. And I had a remote sense of what steps might be helpful along the way to de-risk this highly challenging and risky endeavor of building a company. RPX was the name of that venture that went public, that startup that I joined, which stands for Rational Patent Exchange, that may give you kind of a glimpse into kind of the rationale of business model innovation there. Was a fortuitous step along the way, and exactly what I was hoping to do to kind of jumpstart post B school my journey to ultimately build and do something meaningful.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I love just highlighting those steps, those the realization of those steps, because I have this, go off on a bit of a tangent here, but I have this theory that I drill into people that are like just starting business, and it's, I think, the biggest challenge for young entrepreneurially or entrepreneurial minded or just hungry people is that I think it's impossible for you to think ahead of yourself farther than the amount of time you have behind, just from
Hmm.
a perspective. You just can't. And the hardest thing for people starting out is that every day feels like an eternity, and like the reality that you live in, you don't have any perspective from hindsight because there is no hindsight. And so, if it's not necessarily your end goal and your perfect, reality that you would love to live in, it's very difficult for people to realize that this is a step. You are 20 years old, 30 years old, whatever, however you're starting out, like this is a step and it's going to be very meaningful for whatever is to come. And you can't necessarily see that, but it's there. You know what I mean? And this is important. And so I love the fact that you shared that. And so jumping into your VC life, how was that? That's good. That's, jumping
Hmm.
on two sides of the coin. What was that experience like?
It's funny you said VC because Fortress is almost anything but, which was fascinating for me. Fortress is a large, well-established, diversified private equity and distressed debt credit fund. And
Okay.
so while VC is an asset class, one that is focused in funding the multi-stage creation of new ventures across industries across the world, private equity deals with much more mature industries in distressed credit and debt, as the name probably implies, deals with almost the opposite of VC in the
Mm,
kind of cycle of life, if you will, stages of companies. And every single stage presents different learnings, challenges, opportunities for both sides, right? Like the operators and the financiers around that table. All of that is a long way of saying that this was, again, an amazing school for me, like an advanced PhD type of school in business, and kind of pretty intense business for that matter. Again, kind of private equity and distressed debt. I was profoundly grateful to be there. There were kind of very few folks like me, by way of history and pedigree pre private equity. The kind of the joke in business school was the way that you get into private equity is by applying from private equity, which is of course a circular definition, hard to break through into. And I ended up leaving RPX after it went public with the founder and president, who was a very prominent business person in that domain, of patents, if you will, the business of patents. And I was, again, a fortunate student who was lucky, candidly, to be in the right time next to the right person to go along that journey of growth. And so I'm saying that thanks to that individual, we're able to launch a fund and build funds in a whole business group, if you will, within Fortress, focused on technology and IP, patents, investing. Yeah, so all of that was for me very intense and a huge kind of learning curve. All of that today serves me, I think, very well between kind of the foundational engineering orientation and company creation and kind of high level finance and business.
fascinating. And so then you go on and we'll fast forward a little bit to Laguna Health. What is Laguna Health? Let's start there.
Laguna Health is a conversational care intelligence solution. May sound kind of high level, if you will. What we do specifically is we empower care managers with conversational care intelligence and individual determinants of health, as we call it, to optimize efficiency and impact. To break it down, if you will, a bit more, we leverage natural language processing and Gen AI capabilities. We're able to infuse a bunch of clinical models that we're able to prove in the early stages of our company, to take all the low value work away from the care managers, advocates, navigators, and level up their profession such that they can focus on the members in front of them, pay attention to individual determinants of health that may be mentioned on the call, and offer relevant pathways, as it's called, to resolution and kind of next steps.
That's awesome. And you started this company in 2020, you said, right?
Hmm.
So kind of before the big break of ChatGPT and Gen AI hitting the market in such a, so that's very interesting, because there's a lot of companies that were doing, obviously machine learning and general AI, and there's a lot of companies that are now being highlighted, but they were started 10 years ago. But it's got to have been interesting doing Gen AI in, even a couple years prior to. How do you see the market being different before and after the break of OpenAI and ChatGPT?
Dramatically different. Dramatically different. I think both the market is different, and we, frankly, as a company, are different. We approached this problem, if you will, in a very sequential set of steps, such that early on, what we wanted to demonstrate is first and foremost that the clinical model works. And by way of works, I mean demonstrating in multiple randomized clinical trials with the likes of North Shore, with the likes of Mayo Clinic, all kind of published outcomes, that it really does what it claims to do, that individual determinants of health work, if you will, such that if you're able to uncover them in real time and suggest relevant interventions, you can drive superior outcomes. What we then proceeded to do is build a set of technological solutions that empower others to do that. At that point, to your point, and this is kind of 21, 22, ChatGPT, OpenAI, not only kind of all these capabilities of kind of democratizing, as they often say, LLM models, became front row and center. And so that was exciting for us. We hired the VP AI who was leading that effort for us. And kind of as I joke about it with our with Dr. Alan Spear, our chief medical officer, like, Alan, our goal is to download your brain into a machine to democratize you and to enable everyone else to practice at the top of the license like you. And
Yeah.
so it was very fortuitous to have that tidal wave, if you will, of capabilities and market interest in efficiency and technology driven solutions.
Yeah. So jumping to the actual use case for a moment. So if I'm a care manager, what is my experience using Laguna Health, like in the practical?
Yep, there's two flavors to it, right? It depends kind of what our customers are buying. Some are buying a full blown care management platform,
Okay.
back end, front end oriented, as they call it, kind of consider it a brand new cutting edge Tesla. That does not happen frequently in healthcare because the replacement cycle of these systems is once and forever, to be kind of cute about it.
Hmm.
Because of that, what we built and what took off dramatically is this AI co-pilot that enables care teams to leave the care team in place, workflows in place, and care management platform in place, and have this co-pilot browser add-on next to them. And so, to my Tesla analogy, you get to keep your, say, Ford Focus, and you have Google Maps on your air vent, and you don't need to change anything. And you've kind of, bolt on easy to consume technology. Because what we
Right.
found along the way, that the integration pain is probably the biggest hurdle of all. Like, doesn't matter what type of proof point you have, pricing, reference, doesn't matter. If it's painful to insert, that's it, dead in the water.
Yeah.
And so, as such, it sits next to them. It does, as a baseline, ambient listening, which now became kind of very much table stakes, summarizing calls in a structured way, filling fields. All of that is a given now, but much more than that, it uncovers in real time during the conversation a variety of member insights and suggests pathways and benefits from that customer's portfolio of solutions in place to deal with that. So imagine, again, kind of your most attentive and efficient and effective care manager scaled,
Yeah.
because these are rare, sadly,
Yep.
and
Yep.
expensive.
So let's talk about that ambient listening and kind of the notes generation thing, because it's a market that kind of fascinates me, because you've got a couple different players in the market that are doing just that, right? And so most notably, you've got Nuance, who's that $20 billion acquisition. They're behemoth. They're
Yeah.
also owned by the same people that own ChatGPT, and so. But then you've got these other players that you've got notably. you've got a Bridge, you've got Nabla, you've got these other little tools out there in the market that seem to be gaining some traction. And what's interesting to me, and I'd love to get your take on this, I don't see how these companies remain sustainable, because this technology is going, like you said, it's a given. It's at this point in the game, it's like coming up with email. You know what I mean? Like the idea of taking information and just regurgitating it as more intelligent information is a given. And I think that we're going to see over the next 12 months, 12 to 24 months, most large EHRs having these capabilities built in already. And
Mm-hmm.
so, what does this market look like from your
Mm-hmm.
perspective? And
Mm-hmm.
what do you think the sustainability is of some of these
Mm-hmm.
kind of mid-tier companies that are still being valued at 100, $200 million? But I don't see the path. I don't see the long-term path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Fantastic question, and it's kind of the million, billion, whatever, trillion dollar question. Um, I don't know that the email analogy is and framing is true, because I think that ChatGPT and LLM and Gen AI capabilities is bigger than email, and that's the trick and opportunity, if you will. So consider that as the new kind of internet, mobile, iPhone moment. And if we kind of agree on that fundamental and foundational impact, it's also a foundational enabler of kind of vertical software and domain specific manifestations of it. And that's exactly the opportunity kind of where I'm leading with that. And I think it's fortuitous for us because we started from a very kind of geeky place of kind of clinical domain expertise that only then kind of downloading Alan's brain into a machine versus, oh, we can do prompt engineering. Who needs that? And
Right.
and so I think the distinction and viability and moat and data and kind of sustainability of that company is a function of its domain expertise and differentiated impact.
Yeah.
That compounded over time will create the long-term sustainability and moat.
Yeah, and to be clear, your value prop is pretty obvious to me. I'm more referring to the people that are building entire companies just based on the note and the summarization technology. That's what I'm curious about.
I agree. I think the more generic you are, the more you compete with the large players that, fortunately for them, the kind of the LLM Gen AI revolution or wave or whatever is very favorable to the incumbent.
Yeah,
Very favorable. And, Microsoft's brilliant strategic alliance with Nuance and Epic and OpenAI. I mean, prime position, right? And it's just like one example of many. And so, well, if that is all you do, I would be concerned. And I certainly can't comment about specific folks in the space and what and how they do. But in general, I think in this industrial revolution, whatever kind of the analogy these days may be, the more specific you are, the more it benefits you to grow and remain long-term viable.
yeah, yeah. I agree with you 1,000%. So let's go on to the building of Laguna. Are you guys funded? Did you go raise money? What was your are you bootstrapping? What's your path?
Funded by VCs, very lucky on that front to have domain, not unlike kind of the previous point, domain expertise around the table. Our seed was led by the largest, most sophisticated healthcare oriented funds in Israel. Our Series A was led by domain specific investors in healthcare, all both experts in the space and amazing people. And again, kind of being on the other side, you need both.
Yeah. And so my question to you is for what is your because what's also interesting to me about you is again that even though okay you may not have been a VC, it may have been PE around debt, but you kind of had your head in that world a little bit, and so you're not like you're definitely by no means a newbie startup founder that's just like, oh, money, sure, let me take. And so there's this whole like I feel like there's a shift in startup culture, whereas a couple years ago, until recently, I think the hottest thing that you could do was to raise money by a well renowned fund, and I feel like there's a bit of a shift to maybe not like try to bootstrap, try to do it yourself, try to hold on to it. I think a lot of like the all in pod type crowds is really what I'm I guess referring to. What would your framework be to approaching that decision about fund or bootstrap?
Fantastic question. I think it's a very personal uh, preference, availability, and optionality. And I'll touch on that, right? Your personal preference could be driven by experience or the lack thereof, could be driven by your community, friends, peers, geographic community, um, in addition to you and your market, right? There's also kind of that founder market product fit kind of continuum. In addition to that, there's the market. Like you may prefer this or that. If it's as someone once kind of told me, everything comes out to kind of the alternatives in front of you. If it's not available, you can want it all you want. It's just irrelevant. And I think that is probably the biggest shift that is happening now. It is not as much a preference shift, it is more so a supply, or the lack thereof, of capital that is forcing people's choosing or preference to mirror that to kind of avoid cognitive dissonance. We can kind of speak to different preferences, but I think ultimately the biggest kind of drumbeat is that of the market that's certainly kind of following the contraction of the last, what is it, almost a year and a half, two, post kind of Q4 21. Yeah, I think it's certainly kind of changed the capital availability and filter, like type of companies that get funded from a growth rate, valuation, profitability metrics, to name a few.
Yeah, interesting. So your take, if I understand correctly, is that it's not so much as less people choosing to take funding, but rather the market or the startup community responding to the decreased availability of easy funding. And so people are learning possibly how to operate in that world.
I think so.
Hmm.
I think so.
Interesting. Which might be which might go back to the original point that that founders might find having being forced into that reality, they might find that there's a lot more oil that they can squeeze
Uh,
on their own.
I think it's a healthier, like, and now we're talking about kind of my subjective view, if you will. I think it's healthier to grow in a more capital efficient, disciplined manner. But this is kind of my 2 cents, if you will, that are driven both by mine and my co-founders' philosophy, if you will, and company building. And I would say in history, kind of most successful companies were built in those periods that way. Not to say that that is the only way. And I think like you've seen amazing entrepreneurs and companies kind of riding the wave of capital availability. Um, Not all of them die, right? Like some of them are able to ride it successfully. But in general, I think kind of having kind of so much capital so quickly uh, breaks many things at kind of the leadership level and execution.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you definitely have a lot more visibility into this than I do, but I mean, we've all seen, but I've seen money, break companies. Like the reason why they died was because of the funding, specifically.
Which is kind of counterintuitive for most, because
Yeah,
presumably more is more.
right.
But there's that kind of function, like talking about kind of me drinking water. There's that, even if you're perched, even if you like, there's only so much you can consume at any given moment in time, and it's a delicate and thoughtful balance in a stressful and competitive environment, right? Like
Yeah,
the incentive is to grow a lot.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think what I mean, what I've seen, if I can put it into two buckets, is there's two reasons that happens. One is that the funding entity doesn't have the startup's best interest in mind. They have the fund's best interest in mind. And so the metrics that they push them for are not necessarily the right moves for the specific startup. But the more interesting, I think that's an obvious one, the more interesting thing to me is what funding does psychologically to the founding team and to the executives. And I think that, and I'm literally just thinking this right now, but I think that the successful teams are the ones that manage to remain extremely hungry and extremely agile, and being able to wear multiple hats and be that startup guy that's still doing whatever it takes, even with the funding. And I think that the people that take the funding and then turn it into a corporate entity, and there's roles and there's responsibilities and there's, you know what I mean, and that expands too far, they get too caught up in the funding. I mean, one of the amazing things about Elon is, like, even this is all coming up now because that judge just knocked down his $55 billion thing, right? And like during that period when he was growing Tesla to such a crazy degree, you know, you're talking about a billionaire already, and he was sleeping. He's sleeping in the boardroom. I mean, he just did it again at Twitter. Like, he's the kind of guy that can have all the money in the world and still sleep under his desk. You know what I mean?
And how rare is that? And how necessary, probably, likely that is. And as I strongly agree with everything you said, and kind of just to add kind of that point about Elon, right? That billionaire point is not as much about funding to the company. In private companies terms, that would be secondary. And that, I think, like, not to say that primary funding, namely capital that flows directly into the company's growth operation, like even that shakes the system meaningfully. What sometimes for some people messes up with incentives is that, to your point, billionaire aspect, like, or that hunger from the outside looking in. And again, like, who am I to speak about Elon Musk? Seems to be like this innate, inherent volcano that it just doesn't matter, and like that's that innate drive, which is probably uh, uh, the right way. I mean, obviously, right, to do it, and that is what you want to keep track of, both as a founder and a funder of businesses. Kind of take pulse on that drive, because you need to, because you need to have that engine going no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. I know we kind of digressed a little bit, but great chat around that. Back to Laguna. What are kind of some things that you're proud of, and what are some goals for 2024?
Proud of is easy. Proud of is easy because a lot of things that I take pride in are thanks to our amazing team. Very proud for the clinical studies that we've done. Very proud for the evolution and growth of the company. Very fortunate to have an unbelievable team of leaders next to me, and kind of fortunate to grow next to them and with them. Delighting our customers time and time and time again is not something I take lightly, and it's something that I take a lot of pride in, and I'm privileged to be doing that. And like, talk about the engine that continuously kind of fuels it. So take a lot of pride in some of these points. Opportunities ahead, I think, to your point about kind of Chat GPT and kind of the waves of technology, executing in a timely manner on the opportunity in front of us, I think, is critical. Those are really interesting for us confluence of factors that play now between, kind of uh, market, kind of healthcare cost rising, and kind of more and more attention going to efficiency, and at the same time appreciation of tech, and specifically kind of Gen AI driven solutions, creates a window of opportunity. These windows do not appear frequently and are kind of short. So being able to execute on it successfully and responsibly at the same time is what I'm thinking about frequently.
Awesome. Love it. Well, Yoni, this has been one of those quick hours on the podcast. Some go faster than others, and this was one of the faster ones. So, really great spending time with you. Tremendous continued success, and I'd be remiss if I don't mention that you are operating out of Tel Aviv, out of Israel, which is an active country at war, and it's an incredible thing to witness. I think at the when the war originally broke out, and they asked for reservists to come through, they got like 150% of the amount of people coming up and showing up to bases. And these are people that have lives, that have families, that have jobs. And with Israel and Tel Aviv specifically being kind of Silicon Valley of that whole side of the world, a lot of those people came from companies like Laguna. And we were talking a little bit off camera before, but it really when you take a key employee from a startup and put them on the front, and all of a sudden they're fighting, and that can be really catastrophic to companies. And to see the market that you're operating in, and to see the Israeli startups operate with such fortitude and with such an ability to dig deep and really continue to turn out some tremendous results is obviously heartening and frankly inspirational for us here on the other side of the lake. So
Thank you. Thank you. It means a lot. Thank you.